The silent warship. The cold void of space stretched infinitely in every direction, a vast, unbroken expanse of darkness speckled with distant stars. The monitoring station, perched on the edge of Sector 7, had seen centuries of peace, its corridors bathed in the soft glow of holographic interfaces and the quiet hum of control panels. It was meant to be a watchtower, a passive observer of cosmic movements, not a battlefield. That peace shattered in an instant. Alarms screamed to life, red lights bathing the command center in an urgent, pulsing glow. Officer Joran froze, his fingers hovering above his console, his pulse spiking as he double-checked the readings. The data scrolling across his screen made no sense. His eyes darted to the energy signatures flashing before him, their chaotic, alien nature sending a chill down his spine. "Captain Rylick," Joran called out, forcing his voice to stay steady. "We have an unidentified vessel entering Sector 7. Across the command deck, Captain Rylick, a seasoned officer of the Galactic Council Defense Force, turned sharply. Her 3 sapphire-colored eyes flickered with a mixture of curiosity and unease as she strode toward the console. A tall, slender figure clad in an immaculately pressed uniform, she carried an air of quiet authority. She leaned over Joran's station, scanning the data. What she saw made her blood run cold. The ship was massive, bigger than anything ever recorded in Council archives. Its silhouette, half-drenched in shadow, was monolithic, a floating fortress against the void. There were no markings, no insignias, no transmission signals. It moved without any form of communication, without requesting clearance, without slowing its approach. This wasn't a cargo freighter that had strayed off course. It was a warship. But the most terrifying realization came a moment later. The ship's energy signature. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "Run a full spectrum analysis," Rylick ordered, placing a firm hand on Joran's chair. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something close to fear. Joran's fingers danced over the console, summoning layers upon layers of data, cross-referencing it with the Council's ship database. The screen flickered as the system churned through every known vessel in existence, from the smallest civilian transport to the most classified war machines. The result flashed in bold red text. "No Métis found." Then another alert followed. "Warning. Energy signature DTKCTED. CLSFIET PATTRM match EGET." Captain Rylick's breath hitched. She knew what that meant. A classified alert was only triggered under one condition: if a ship displayed an energy signature that had been deliberately erased from the Council's public records. A forbidden design, a forbidden enemy, a human vessel. A ripple of murmurs spread through the control room. Officers who had spent their entire careers hearing stories about humanity, the quarantined species, the primitives too dangerous to integrate into the wider galaxy, suddenly found themselves staring at a terrifying reality. A human warship had entered Council space. "They're not supposed to have ships like this," Joran whispered, his throat dry. "Humans were quarantined decades ago. Their technology is clearly not as primitive as we believed." Rylick cut in. Her 3 eyes remained locked on the screen, analyzing the ship's intricate hull structure. It was sleek, efficient, built with a cold, uncompromising purpose, not the fragile, haphazard designs the Council had once mocked. The more she looked, the more uneasy she became. Massive engines pulsed with barely contained power, thrusters glowing with an eerie blue-white intensity. It moved like a predator, cutting through space with calculated precision. And the weapon ports, there were too many of them. She swallowed hard. "They're ignoring our hails," Joran reported. "They're not responding to identification requests. They don't need to." Rylick straightened, her posture tense. "They're not here by accident." She turned to the communications officer. "Send an urgent priority signal to Central Command. I want every available patrol fleet rerouted to this sector immediately, and keep our defense platforms on full alert." The comms officer nodded, hands flying over the console. But as he initiated the transmission, a sharp beep echoed through the room. His face drained of color. "Captain, the transmission signal is being jammed." Joran's eyes widened. "That's not possible. Council-grade encryption is useless if the enemy understands it." Rylak finished grimly. She turned back to the massive, silent warship, her gut tightening. It wasn't just here. It was blocking them from calling for reinforcements. It had planned this. A terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if the quarantine hadn't been for humanity's protection? What if it had been to protect the galaxy from them? Joran's voice cut through the silence, barely above a whisper. "Captain, what do we do?" Rylak exhaled slowly. There was only one answer. "We watch," she said. "We learn. And we prepare, because whatever is happening here is only the beginning." As if responding to her words, the warship suddenly changed course. The ship, which had been advancing steadily toward the trade routes, abruptly veered away, angling toward a nearby asteroid field. They weren't retreating. They were hunting something. Rylak's spine stiffened. What could make a warship of this size hunt in Council space? She was about to find out. And she had a feeling it would change everything they thought they knew about humanity. The hunters in the dark. The warship drifted into the asteroid field, its silhouette swallowed by the jagged labyrinth of rock and ice. Captain Rylak watched, her 3 sapphire eyes narrowing. This wasn't the behavior of an invading force. The ship had changed course deliberately, evading direct confrontation with the patrol fleets that were en route. They were hunting something. But what? "Follow them in," she ordered, her voice firm. A ripple of hesitation spread through the bridge. Officer Joran Vell, still pale from the previous encounter, cleared his throat. "Captain, that field is dense. Even our best pilots struggle to navigate it. If we pursue and they attack." "We're not engaging," Rylak interrupted. "We observe. I need to know why a human warship of this size is moving through Council space like a predator on the hunt." She turned to the navigation officer. "Take us in." The Swift Justice, her Council defense flagship, shuddered as its thrusters adjusted course. The sleek, silver vessel angled itself toward the asteroid field, following the dark silhouette of the human warship as it slipped between the tumbling rocks with impossible precision. Rylak's fingers tightened against the armrests of her chair. Humans weren't supposed to have this level of technology. For decades, they had been contained within their system, a species deemed too dangerous to integrate, too unstable to trust. The Council had ensured their fleets never advanced past primitive warp capabilities, locking them behind bureaucratic red tape and heavily enforced patrol lines. And yet, here they were. A warship that should not exist, moving with a level of control no Council vessel could match. Rylak exhaled slowly. The galaxy had underestimated them. "Captain, the human ship is performing evasive maneuvers," Joran said, his voice laced with both awe and confusion. "They're using the gravitational pull of the asteroids to slingshot themselves forward." Rylak watched the holographic display as the massive warship twisted and rolled through the asteroid field with impossible grace. The thrusters pulsed at precise moments, allowing it to dip between massive rock formations that should have been too tight for a ship of its size. "They've pre-mapped this route," Joran whispered. "They knew this field would give them cover." "They're not just avoiding us," Rylak murmured, a growing sense of unease settling over her. "They're tracking something." As if on cue, a sudden pulse of energy erupted deep within the asteroid field. The holographic sensors flared, painting the entire screen in ghostly green light. "That energy's signature," Joran's voice faltered. "It's the same as the one we detected earlier." Rylak's mind raced. The first energy reading had come from the human warship itself, but this new one. She turned sharply to her sensor officer. "Confirm its origin." The officer's hands moved swiftly across his console, his face draining of color as the results appeared. "Captain," he said, voice shaking, "it's coming from another vessel. An unknown vessel. A silence swept across the bridge. Another warship. Here. Visuals. Rylek barked. The screen flickered to life, revealing a hulking mass of shifting, obsidian black metal, partially hidden within the shadow of a colossal asteroid. Its form seemed fluid, as if it were made of something not entirely solid. Pockets of green, pulsating energy flickered across its surface like a living organism. A ship. No. A predator. It wasn't built. It had grown. The tension on the bridge became suffocating. What in the name of the stars is that? Someone whispered. Then, as if hearing the question, the creature ship moved. It didn't accelerate like a normal vessel. It drifted forward unnaturally, like it had simply decided to exist in a new location. Its entire form rippled, the green pulses along its surface growing brighter. And suddenly, dozens of tentacle-like appendages extended from its hull. It was alive. A deep guttural hum filled the communication channels. Not a language. A sound. A warning. A challenge. Before Rylek could process what was happening, the human warship reacted. It fired. A deafening burst of kinetic rounds shot forward, not energy-based weapons, but physical projectiles. Old, primitive, crude. Yet they struck with devastating force. The alien ship shuddered, its liquid-like hull warping upon impact, struggling to reform itself. But the human warship didn't stop. It had come prepared for this enemy. It knew. Rylek barely had time to react before the comms officer gasped. Incoming transmission. From the human ship. Put it through. Rylek ordered. The voice that crackled over the speakers was calm, commanding, and unmistakably human. To the council vessel Swift Justice, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. The entity before you is hostile. It has no concept of surrender. It is not here by accident. It is here to feed. Stand down and let us handle this. Rylek's heart pounded in her chest. The entity. She turned to Duran, but he was already scanning the archives, his hands trembling over the controls. Captain, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I found something. It's buried deep in classified records, but the energy signature matches an ancient report. A race from 50,000 years ago. A race that vanished. The translation of the species name appeared on the screen. The Sleepers. A chill ran down Rylek's spine. Humans knew about this, she whispered. They came here to hunt it. The comms crackled again. Do not get in our way. This war started long before your kind ever looked up at the stars. Stay back, or be consumed with the rest. The message ended. On the screen, the human warship unleashed another devastating volley, each kinetic shell piercing through the creature's writhing mass, like spears through flesh. The Sleepers were writhing now, reacting violently. And then, the creature turned its attention to them. A pulse of green light exploded outward, sweeping through the asteroid field. The consoles aboard the Swift Justice flickered and dimmed. Every screen went black. Then, a single symbol appeared on the display. A warning from the deepest, most classified layers of Council archives. A message left behind from a species that had fought these things before. Run. Rylek barely had time to breathe before the Sleepers launched themselves toward the Swift Justice. And at that moment, she realized. Humanity hadn't broken quarantine to invade. They had broken it because something much worse was waking up. And the war had already begun. The war before time. The Swift Justice shuddered violently as the energy wave washed over it, a green, pulsating shockwave that seemed to scrape against the ship's hull like living claws. Every console flickered erratically, and for a moment, the entire bridge was cast into darkness. Then, a warning klaxon shrieked to life. Shields are failing, Duran shouted, gripping his console as static filled the screen. The energy signature, it's phasing through our defenses. Captain Rylek clenched her jaw. No enemy had ever bypassed Council shielding before. Not even the most advanced militarized species in the galaxy had managed such a feat. But these things, the sleepers, were doing it effortlessly. On the flickering main display, she saw the human warship move. It wasn't fleeing. It was accelerating toward the creature. "Captain, the humans are charging weapons again," Jaren called out. His hands flew across his console, trying to decipher their battle strategy. They're still using kinetic rounds, no energy-based weapons at all. Rylak exhaled sharply. It made no sense. Every major civilization in the Galactic Council relied on energy weapons. They were faster, more efficient, capable of disintegrating armor and shielding in milliseconds. So why weren't the humans using them? Unless a sickening realization hit her. "Energy weapons don't work on these creatures," she whispered. The bridge fell silent. The horrific truth sank in. These beings, the sleepers, weren't just immune to traditional council weaponry. They fed on it. The moment that energy pulse swept over their ship, their shields began to fail. But the human warship had taken the same pulse and remained untouched. They knew. The humans had been fighting these things before the council even existed, and they had kept it a secret. "Captain, we have incoming." Jaran's voice yanked her back to the present as the sleepers lunged toward their vessel. The screen erupted with blazing red warning indicators as the creature's appendages stretched through space, writhing as if sensing its next meal. The nearest tendril, pulsing with sickly green energy, extended toward the Swift Justice's engines. Rylak snapped to action. Evasive maneuvers, full thrusters, no. The Swift Justice's massive engines roared to life, sending the ship into a sharp downward dive. The gravitational pull of a nearby asteroid pulled them into a spiraling turn, narrowly avoiding the sleeper's attack. But it was too close. The energy tendril lashed out, grazing the ship's starboard hull. A horrific metallic shriek echoed through the bridge as the energy pulsed through their systems. Sparks exploded from multiple consoles. Several officers were thrown to the ground as the ship lurched violently to the side. Then, silence. Rylak struggled to her feet, her vision blurred from the impact. A metallic burning scent filled the air. "Damage report," she barked. Jaren coughed, blood on his lip. "Hull breach, decks 12 through 14. Emergency bulkheads are sealing." But he hesitated, his fingers trembling over his console. Rylak's three eyes narrowed. "But what?" Joran swallowed. The damage wasn't physical. The bridge went still. "The hull is intact," he continued. "It's like the metal itself is disintegrating from the inside." A cold shiver ran down Rylak's spine. These creatures didn't attack like normal enemies. They infected. The sleepers were consuming their ship from within, and the council had no countermeasure. But the humans did. The Defender, the massive human warship, was still moving. Fast. Unlike the council ship, its hull didn't weaken, its thrusters didn't flicker. It maneuvered around the twisting, writhing tendrils with an almost predatory grace. And then, it fired again. A hailstorm of kinetic rounds tore through the sleeper's shifting form, each shot bursting through its unnatural, writhing flesh, like harpoons piercing water. For the first time, the sleeper recoiled. It let out a sound. Not through comms, not through transmissions, through their minds. A horrific primal scream rang through Rylak's skull. It wasn't sound. It was pure, raw terror. Something ancient. Something that had survived for thousands of years, until now. Because for the first time in eons, the sleepers were afraid. And the humans. They were hunting. Rylak steadied herself, eyes locked onto the Defender as it closed the distance to the monstrous entity. It wasn't retreating. It was getting closer. "What are they doing?" she muttered. Then she saw it. The front bay doors of the human warship opened. A large cylindrical object, coated in reinforced steel, was being prepped for launch. Jaran's fingers raced across the screen, scanning the device. His breath hitched. That's a nuclear warhead. The words sent a cold, suffocating silence across the bridge. Nuclear weapons were banned in the Council territories for a reason. Their raw kinetic and explosive force was too unpredictable, especially in space combat. Yet the humans were about to use one. "They're insane," an officer whispered. "If that detonates in this asteroid field, it'll..." The warhead launched. Rylak braced for impact. The nuclear projectile shot forward, spinning violently as it pierced the sleeper's outer shell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a white-hot explosion ripped through the darkness. The asteroid field erupted into a shockwave of molten debris as the force of the detonation tore through the creature's form. Its tentacle-like appendages convulsed, writhing, its pulsing green core flickering violently. The sleepers shrieked, a sound not of rage, but of death. For the first time in 50,000 years, something had killed them. The explosion faded. What remained of the sleeper was a drifting, charred husk, its energy snuffed out. Silence. Then, a transmission crackled over the comms. The same calm, human voice. One down. A beat of silence. Then, more are coming. Rylak exhaled slowly. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The truth buried in fire. The drifting husk of the sleeper floated lifelessly in space, its grotesque, obsidian-like form now reduced to burning fragments, the green pulses of its unnatural energy snuffed out by the nuclear detonation. The asteroid field around it had been permanently scarred. Melted craters, shattered debris, and a silent storm of dust now swirled in the wake of the explosion. Yet there was no time for relief, because the humans were right. More were coming. "Captain, I have multiple new energy signatures emerging from deep space." Joran's voice was tight with barely contained fear. His fingers trembled as he enlarged the holographic star map. They're moving fast. Too fast. Captain Rylak didn't need to see the screen to understand what was happening. The galaxy had assumed these creatures were extinct, that whatever force had ended them thousands of years ago had wiped them from existence. But humanity had always known the truth. The sleepers weren't extinct. They had been hibernating. And now, they were awake. She clenched her jaw as she analyzed the approaching energy signatures. Each one radiated an intensity that made the first sleeper look like a scouting drone. These weren't just stragglers. This was an invasion force. "How long until they reach us?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain calm. 15 minutes, Joran answered. "Maybe less." "And Captain," he hesitated, swallowing hard, "one of the signals is colossal, bigger than anything I've ever seen." Rylak's stomach twisted. Then the human warship moved. On the screen, the Defender shifted its course, aligning itself to face the incoming storm of horrors. It was outnumbered, its weaponry already depleted from the first battle. And yet, it didn't retreat. It advanced. Another transmission crackled over the comms, this time without the cold precision of before. Now, the human commander's voice carried urgency. "Swift justice, we need to talk. Now." Rylak didn't hesitate. "Open the channel," she ordered. The screen flickered, revealing the battle-worn face of Commander Thomas. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but beneath that hardened expression, she could see something else. A deep, suffocating knowledge. This was not humanity's first war with the sleepers, and it wouldn't be their last. "You need to listen," Thomas said. His voice carried a weight that sent chills through the bridge. "This isn't just an invasion. It's a cycle, a war that's been repeating itself long before your civilizations even existed." Rylak narrowed her gaze. "Explain." Thomas exhaled, running a hand over his face. "You think we were quarantined because we were dangerous, because we were too unstable to join the Galactic Council. But that's not the truth, is it?" Silence. The bridge crew turned toward Rylak, waiting. But she said nothing. Because deep down, she had already begun to suspect it. The quarantine wasn't for humanity's safety. It was to keep the rest of the galaxy away from them. We found records, Thomas continued, buried in ruins older than human civilization itself. Documents that describe the true history of the sleepers. The holographic display shifted, revealing ancient carvings, faded writings on metallic plates, and disturbing pictographs of humanoid figures fighting creatures that resembled the sleepers. "This isn't the first time they've awakened," Thomas said. "It happened long before the Council existed, back when our ancestors were still fighting with swords and fire." Rylek studied the images. The engravings showed warriors clad in primitive armor, hurling explosive projectiles, setting entire landscapes ablaze. But what stood out the most? The sleepers were fleeing, not attacking. Fleeing. She inhaled sharply. "You fought them before." Thomas nodded. "Not us. Our ancestors. But yes, and we didn't just fight them. We nearly wiped them out." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. No one spoke. The Council had always believed humanity's aggression was a weakness, that their tendency for war was what made them unfit to integrate into the greater galactic community. But what if it wasn't a weakness? What if it was the reason they had survived? Thomas continued, his expression darkening. "The Council didn't want to accept what we found, so they locked us away. Cut us off from the rest of the galaxy. They thought that if they erased our knowledge, if they made us forget, the sleepers would never wake up." He let out a bitter laugh. They were wrong. Rylek felt her hands clench into fists. The Council had lied to them. The quarantine wasn't about protection. It was about erasing history. Joran spoke up, his voice weak. "Then, the weapons you use, the projectiles, the nuclear detonations, you built them because you knew energy-based attacks wouldn't work." Thomas nodded. "We've been preparing for this war for centuries." For the first time in her career, Rylek felt truly afraid. Because if the Council had hidden this secret, what else had they buried? The sensors beeped again. The sleepers were here. And this time, they weren't alone. On the screen, the incoming energy signatures multiplied. Dozens, hundreds. Then, finally, the colossal signal appeared. The display trembled as a massive shape emerged from the void. The bridge fell dead silent. The creature was enormous. Not a warship, not a fleet. A world devourer. Its writhing, obsidian black body stretched for miles, its form shifting like a living storm, tendrils crackling with violent green fire. And at its center, a single glowing core. Joran's voice trembled. "Captain, that thing is the size of a moon." The Council had always assumed that the sleepers' numbers had dwindled, that they were a dying race. But this thing, it had been waiting, and now it had arrived. Thomas's voice cut through the terror. "This is your last chance, Captain," he said. "You can run and let the Council's lies get you killed." The Defender powered its thrusters, locking onto the titanic creature with precision. "Or you can fight." The seconds ticked by. The massive sleeper entity let out a pulse of energy, and suddenly, smaller creatures began pouring from its form, like a living nest unleashing its horrors. Rylek took a breath. She had spent her entire life following the Council's orders. Now, she had to make a choice. She turned to her crew. Prepare for battle. And just like that, the fate of the galaxy changed forever.